Have you ever wondered whether true progress comes from reshaping society through ideology or from living rightly through personal virtue? Is life changed by revolution in theory or by discipline and ethical practice in daily action? Imagine a clash of extraordinary minds: political philosophy confronting Stoic wisdom, collective transformation versus individual mastery. A battle not of manifestos or lectures, but principles that define how we live and lead. Stay until the end, subscribe now, and witness the debate. Karl Marx, the revolutionary thinker of ideology and social change, versus Musonius Rufus, the Stoic master of practical virtue.
Musonius Rufus, you speak of personal virtue, self-discipline, and the ethical mastery of the individual. These are admirable qualities, yet I argue that the true measure of human life is not contained within the individual alone. It is shaped by society, by the structures that govern production, power, and opportunity. To focus solely on the self is to ignore the chains that bind entire classes, to overlook the injustice embedded in social systems that determine the possibilities of every life. The individual cannot flourish in isolation from society. Ethics and virtue, while noble, are insufficient to address the material conditions that define human existence. Inequality, oppression, and exploitation shape the world far more profoundly than personal restraint ever can. It is the collective, through ideology and action, that has the power to transform these structures and create a life of genuine freedom and justice. History is driven by conflict: class against class, labor against capital, and the tensions that arise when humans are denied their basic needs and rights. To understand life, we must see these forces at work, recognize the systems that oppress, and envision alternatives that liberate. Virtue without awareness of systemic injustice risks complicity. Discipline without critique may maintain the status quo rather than challenge it. Musonius Rufus, I respect the Stoic ideal of ethical living, yet it is society that sets the stage for virtue to thrive. A man may master himself, but if he is confined by poverty, exploitation, or structural injustice, his personal virtue is limited in scope and impact. Ideology provides the framework to transform conditions, to create environments where virtue can be exercised freely and meaningfully. To change the world, one must understand it, analyze its contradictions, and act collectively. Observation, critique, and organized action are necessary to liberate humanity from oppression and unlock potential on a societal scale. Ethical reflection alone, confined to the individual, cannot dismantle systemic inequality or transform the lives of millions. I am Karl Marx, and I argue that while personal virtue has value, true mastery of life requires understanding and transforming the material and social forces that govern our existence. Ideology, critique, and collective action are essential for genuine freedom, justice, and the realization of human potential.
Karl Marx, your vision of society, your analysis of class struggle, and your call for collective action are powerful and thought-provoking. I do not dismiss the importance of addressing social conditions or the inequities embedded in human structures. Yet I contend that before a society can flourish, the individuals within it must cultivate virtue, self-discipline, and moral clarity. Transformation of the self is the foundation upon which any just society is built. You argue that structural injustice limits the potential of personal virtue. But consider this: a man who masters himself acts rightly regardless of circumstance. Ethical living, discipline, and moral integrity provide strength that is not dependent on wealth, power, or social reform. Even in oppressive systems, the individual can maintain dignity, justice, and composure. Virtue is portable. Systems of society are not. A man without discipline is vulnerable to corruption, even when acting within an ideal society. You speak of ideology as the path to collective liberation, yet ideology without virtue can become dogma or tyranny. History is littered with examples where movements, though justified in intention, led to oppression when guided by unchecked ambition rather than moral clarity. Practical virtue ensures that knowledge, power, and social action are applied ethically and wisely. The individual's moral compass governs not only personal conduct, but the manner in which one engages with the wider world. Marx, you emphasize collective struggle, yet I argue that without personal mastery, individuals may be led by passion, anger, or desire rather than reason. True societal change emerges from virtuous individuals making wise choices, exercising justice, and embodying ethical principles in every interaction. The transformation of the self precedes and enables meaningful transformation of society. Observation of injustice, critique of social structures, and collective action are valuable, yet they are guided most effectively when the participants are disciplined, self-aware, and virtuous. Without such grounding, movements risk devolving into chaos or perpetuating harm. Personal virtue is the seed from which just societies grow. Ideology is the soil, but it cannot flourish without ethical cultivation. I am Musonius Rufus, and I argue that practical virtue, discipline, and ethical living provide the foundation for meaningful societal change. Understanding structures is necessary, but without cultivating the moral character to navigate them wisely, true justice and lasting transformation remain out of reach.
Musonius Rufus, I respect your insistence on personal virtue, discipline, and ethical living. Yet I must stress, individual mastery, while admirable, cannot by itself dismantle the chains that bind entire societies. A virtuous man may act rightly within a flawed system, but without transforming the structures that govern human life, the broader potential of justice, equality, and freedom remains unrealized. Ethics in isolation risks irrelevance when systemic oppression limits opportunity, restricts access, and perpetuates suffering. History moves through collective struggle, through organized action, and through ideology that reveals inequalities and charts a path toward liberation. Observing injustice is necessary, but critique alone does not suffice. Understanding the mechanisms of power, property, and class is essential to guide effective change. Without such insight, virtue may be noble, but it cannot correct societal imbalance. You argue that virtue is portable and that the individual can maintain integrity under any system. This is true, yet the individual's scope is limited. Collective understanding and action enable millions to live ethically and freely, far beyond what a single virtuous life can achieve. Ideology equips humanity with the tools to recognize oppression, mobilize for change, and create conditions where virtue can flourish on a societal scale. Personal virtue is vital, yes, but it is strengthened, amplified, and given purpose when paired with an understanding of society's structures. One who masters himself but remains blind to class, labor, and power may act ethically, yet the masses remain constrained. Ideology informs strategy. Discipline alone does not reshape reality. Musonius Rufus, ethics must not retreat into the individual. It must confront society. Virtue guides action, but insight into systemic forces ensures that such action is meaningful and transformative. The freedom of the few cannot substitute for the liberation of the many. I am Karl Marx, and I argue that while personal virtue is important, true mastery of life requires understanding and transforming social conditions so that ethical principles can be realized for all, not only within the isolated self.
Karl Marx, your vision of societal transformation, class struggle, and collective liberation is compelling, and I recognize its importance. Yet I insist, without virtuous, disciplined individuals, even the most well-conceived ideologies risk faltering. Systems change, but human nature remains constant. Without ethical grounding, movements can devolve into chaos, coercion, or tyranny, no matter the purity of their ideals. Virtue is portable. Ideology is dependent on those who enact it. A society composed of disciplined, self-aware individuals creates the foundation for justice and fairness to endure. Ethics guides the application of knowledge and power. Discipline ensures that insight is used wisely. Structural change, without moral character, risks perpetuating harm rather than alleviating it. Observation of inequality and critique of societal mechanisms are valuable, but they must be exercised by those capable of ethical judgment. Personal mastery ensures that action is guided by justice rather than passion. that reforms are implemented with wisdom rather than impulse. Without discipline, knowledge becomes a tool for ambition or destruction, not liberation. Marx' societal transformation is not invalid, but it is incomplete without the cultivation of virtue within each person. Ethical individuals shape the application of ideology, ensuring that change aligns with justice, prudence, and humanity. Observation and critique illuminate problems, yet virtue determines solutions. I am Musonius Rufus, and I assert that practical virtue, discipline, and ethical living are the foundation upon which meaningful, lasting societal change can be achieved. Ideology may illuminate injustice, but virtue ensures that insight is translated into right action for the benefit of all.
Subscribe now and comment below. Who do you think won this debate of principles? Tonight, we witness Karl Marx, the revolutionary thinker analyzing society and ideology to drive collective change, versus Musonius Rufus, the Stoic philosopher teaching practical virtue, discipline, and ethical living. Ideology illuminates the structures of oppression, but virtue guides how we respond. One seeks societal transformation, the other cultivates individual mastery. Reflect, compare, and decide. Which path inspires your own journey?